Welcome back to another Conversations with a Dog Trainer video. We're going to get into some heavy stuff today. We're going to talk about medicating a dog for behavioral problems. Is it the right thing to do? Should we even consider it? Maybe you've got a dog that's on medication or it's been recommended to you, and I'm going to share my thoughts with you. Now, before we get into that, who am I? I'm Nick Zivgolis. I'm the owner of Family Canine Dog Training, and I've been a professional dog trainer for over 30 years. In that time, I've trained thousands of dogs, and my specialty is working with pet dogs for all types of training, obedience, problem behavior. People come to me with behavioral problems ranging from mild to severe, problems that other trainers have tried to help them resolve and maybe not had success, problem behavior where vets have recommended medication, sometimes multiple medications for a dog. So just to give you a little bit of background to contextualize what we're going to talk about, that's my experience. And this is why I'm going to present this to you today. So before I get started, I just want to preface everything I'm going to say by telling you that I'm talking in a general sense here today, and I'm not telling you whether or not you should medicate your dog. I'm not telling you whether or not this is a good or bad thing or an ethical thing. I'm just simply telling you my experience. If you've got a behavioral problem with your dog, definitely consult with a trainer, one who's got experience in helping resolve the issues that you're encountering with your dog. This is not stuff to learn on YouTube. This is a conversation that we're having, hence Conversations with a Dog Trainer. Serious things like this cannot be resolved by watching videos or simply chatting with someone about it. Problem behavior is very distressing, not only for the dog, but for the dog owner. Dog owners love their dogs dearly. They don't want to see their dogs suffer. They don't want their dogs in distress. They don't want their dogs or the environment around them at risk, other dogs, other people, in cases of aggressive behavior. Sometimes it's in cases of dogs that are self-mutilating. I've dealt with a ton of that stuff. So at the end of the day, we see a dog suffering and we recognize that it's a quality of life issue. It's perhaps a safety issue, and we want to resolve it, and we want to resolve it as quickly as possible. I get that. I totally get that. I understand how people end up there. What we need to focus on when we're looking at behavioral problems is what is best for the dog as well as the owner, and what is best for society at large in cases of behavioral problem where the dog is reactive or aggressive, or maybe even just nuisance barking and it's keeping neighbors up. We've got to look at that triangle, dog, owner, society, right? And the solution has to encompass all of that. Solely medicating a dog, meaning that if the only thing that we're going to address is here's a prescription for your dog, is avoiding the problem. If we're not exploring a behavioral solution to a behavioral problem, we are avoiding the problem. The same thing happens when we just manage the environment. If somebody says, well, your dog reacts to a dog down the street, walk the other way. You don't need to walk down that way. Okay. But I guarantee you that the problem will come back again later on, that behavior will come back yet again. There is specific behavior and then generalized behavior, and often specific behavior will generalize over time. Not always, but often it will. And what I'm trying to point out is that by us as humans employing avoidance behavior, we're likely going to paint ourselves into a corner before we know it. The world of the dog, as well as the owner, gets a lot smaller if the approach is simply to medicate or manage the environment or just to employ avoidance. Very often, I will be in a consultation with someone whose dog is medicated, and they'll tell me it's not even doing anything to help resolve the issue going on. So what are we getting for the medication? Well, we're getting a dog that very often people will say is a shadow of itself. The dog is kind of dopey, walking around in a haze, maybe a little bit lethargic, but it's not really resolving the issue. And that is where solely medicating the dog is problematic. In many cases, they'll combine medications. So for instance, I just met with a dog that is medicated. We did a consult. The dog is reactive to humans and dogs. And the dog is wildly reactive to other dogs. And yet in the consultation, given a little bit of guidance, a little bit of time, the dog settled down. Settled down like nothing the owners have ever seen before. And yet when they contacted the vet, telling the vet that they were still experiencing challenges, the vet said, well, we're going to layer some gabapentin on top of the medication you're already giving your dog. So we're taking a stressed out dog, and instead of giving him coping mechanisms, they are layering medication on top of medication. In less than 10 minutes, with a little bit of careful planning, I didn't employ any avoidance. I brought a dog right into the room. And I want to point out that the dog I brought into the room was in for training because she's a reactive dog. You won't see her react while she's there. And I'm not the only one handling her, and I'm not even giving her direction. I just went and took her from her kennel and brought her into the room with me. She just accompanied me. And then I handed her over to one of this dog's owners, the dog that was in for the consultation. So now she's being passed off to a total stranger, and her behavior is mirroring with the stranger how she behaved with me. And their dog, back to my original point, just settled down. He turned his back to her. A side note, but a very important one. If the owner medicates the dog and that's the only plan of action, the owner is not learning anything as a result. The owner is not learning to better understand their dog. The owner is not learning to better direct and lead and handle the dog. So are they going to be in a better position in a day, a week, a month, a year? Absolutely not. Even if the medication helps, the team of human and dog have not advanced at all in their skill set. So even if the medication is working, if we run out, if we pull the medication, if the person decides one day, I don't want to do this for the rest of my dog's life, there is nothing that has been developed. Whereas if we're training the dog, even if you're medicating the dog, if you train the dog in conjunction with the medication, you can wean the dog off the medication. So to simply medicate, to me, is not the answer. And it definitely shouldn't be the long-term goal in all but the most severe cases. And even then, I've worked with some real doozies. And we were able to wean the overwhelming majority of dogs off the medication. If medication has been suggested or prescribed to you and your dog, I would hope that the vet had a plan of action outlined for you. This is what we hope to see in 2 weeks, 4 weeks. This is a tapering off plan, possibly, potentially, and certainly I hope that they talk to you about working with a trainer so that you can get a plan of action going. Another consideration is once we've got things under control and managed, has the dog learned anything? Not just skills, but has the dog learned anything about itself, about its ability to cope? Have we developed a more resilient dog? That should always be at the top of our list of goals. Build resilience in your dog. So have we done that, or have we simply numbed the dog? If we have a nervous dog, a reactive dog, an anxious dog, what we're saying at the end of the day is that the dog suffers from stress and that the dog is stressed very easily. Everyday little life moments are very difficult for the dog. The recipe for this is to help the dog learn to deal with stress, not to avoid it. We can't avoid all stress in life. It's just not doable. So dogs that are deprived from stress and from conditioning to stress are dogs that need to live a very isolated, very sheltered life. A common thread that I hear from people in consultations and even in emails is, I have to walk my dog on the quietest streets. I can't take my dog to places I'd like to go with my dog. I have to go early morning or late night to make sure that it's not too busy or that the other dogs aren't out or that the sidewalks aren't too full of people. And they are just caught in this loop of avoidance, because the only way we can survive the day is by avoiding. And it's the same thing when we're medicating our dogs, and that's all we're doing. We're painting ourselves into a corner. So if you are avoiding in any way, shape, or form, and that is working, you are harming the dog long term. You're getting through the day, but you are harming the dog long term. Now, what I mean by that is, I'll give you a human example. Take money. Your bills are paid, everything's okay. You've got $1,000 in the bank. So you say, I'm good, everything's paid. That's a little bit of extra money. And you just let it sit there in the bank, and it sits and it sits and it sits. 3-4 years from now, that $1,000 is still $1,000. 3-4 years from now, bread costs more, gas costs more. Everything has moved on. And your $1,000 has sat there eroding against inflation. Is that $1,000 worth $1,000 anymore? No. It has eroded over time. You take a dog with a behavioral issue and you've played the avoidance game, whether it's avoiding a street, avoiding busy times of day, medicating the dog, controlling the environment in any way, shape, or form, rather than conditioning the dog and building the dog up to tolerate healthy, normal amounts of stress, diminishing returns. Because after a while, the things that the dog was comfortable with, now the dog has nervous twitches about that. Whereas the dog that's been stress conditioned over time, what happens is it's like interest. It grows. The healthy stress helps the dog grow, okay? We use healthy stress in our own lives all the time. The simplest example I could give you is exercise. When you exercise your body, you are stressing your body. Now, common sense says that if you do too much of it, you're going to have those diminishing returns, right? You can't just exercise nonstop. You can't go to the gym and lift more weight than your body is capable of, because then you're going to injure yourself. You can't just, I can't just cycle nonstop. I will run myself into the ground. Fatigue, chronic fatigue, lowered immune system. So when I first started cycling and I started to really train, I paid attention to something we call TSS, your training stress score. Training stress score is basically a metric that tells you how hard you're training in any individual session on the bike. And then you look at it in chunks of a week and so forth. In the beginning, I could tolerate maybe 200 to 300 TSS, the training stress score, in a week. Flash forward a dozen years later, I can easily do that in a ride. I can do a long ride, 200-300 kilometers, and I can motor pretty hard. So my body's ability to withstand training stress has grown. And as such, my fitness has improved, and my ability to endure long rides or really tough rides has improved. And in the beginning, when I would push my training too hard, I was just overzealous, I would run myself down with fatigue, or I would catch colds very frequently, very easily, okay? Someone would sneeze in the next province and I'd catch a cold because it was just too much for me. And I didn't have someone guiding me and teaching me, and I was kind of figuring it out as I went. And I figured out really quick, hey, too much of this, no good. And as a dog trainer, that made sense to me. I said, well, if I was training a dog and conditioning a dog that was stressed out by, let's say, traffic, I'm not going to take the dog to the busiest place and stay there for 12 hours a day. I'm going to take the dog out to a moderately busy place and we'll go for a few minutes, and I might play with the dog, and I might just hang out and let the dog observe, and I might feed the dog a few treats. The point is, I'm conditioning the dog to stress. And as I do this over and over, the dog's tolerance grows and grows and grows. Now, if you're trying to do this on your own, it's very possible, very plausible that you end up like I did trying to do my cycling training on my own. There's trial and error involved. Now, in my case, it's a cold, it's a little bit of fatigue, it's not a big deal, and I recover from it and I bounce back. In the case of a nervous, anxious, fearful dog, you can do a lot of damage. So this is where I would strongly encourage those of you who are watching to try and benefit their dogs to consider two things. Number one, if you can afford to do so, work with a trainer. Watching videos is great, but nothing replaces working with a skilled, qualified trainer that can take you by the hand and guide you through the steps. They can read your dog. They've been there and done that thousands of times. They know the recipe for your dog, number one. Number two, if you can't do that for whatever reason, be very, very conservative in your approach. It's always better to move slowly and do no damage to the dog. Meaning you take 10 sessions to accomplish what might have taken 1 or 2 with someone guiding you through the steps, but at least you've moved really, really baby steps and you've not caused any harm to the dog or to your progress as a result. So those diminishing returns, they work in a way that people don't even understand. People start by managing the environment, avoiding things, medicating the dog, and it helps them get through the day. And then as time goes on, your world and your dog's world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And then you end up with a 7, 8, 10-year-old dog. And then you decide, hey, enough's enough. By then, it's not that it's too late, but hey, it would have been a lot better if we addressed it earlier. Now, a dog that keeps coming to mind while I'm talking about all of this stuff is a German Shepherd dog named Lena. Lena came in for a consult at the beginning of this year, or maybe it was in March of this year. And she's, if memory serves, a 7-year-old German Shepherd. She's on Prozac. She's on possibly another medication as well. Again, I'm going back a number of months. I didn't look at her file before starting this, and I probably should have. But in any event, she's at least 7 years old and on Prozac. She's been a nervous, reactive dog her entire life. Her owners are lovely people. They adore their dog. They want the best for their dog. They see this dog overwhelmed by life, and the vet says, hey, Prozac is the way to go. So they come in for a consult, and the first thing I do, I take the dog, she's got a muzzle on, and the dog is just trembling. She's all over the place. And I tell them, your dog is ridiculous. She's so silly. She's afraid of everything. She doesn't know why, but she's just stuck in this loop. And the dog is nervous, and the owners are nervous. And this is where I talk about owners improving their skill set. The dog benefits from it. The owners benefit from it too, of course. But the dog benefits from it so much. The dog didn't benefit from the Prozac, and the owners didn't learn to drive. They didn't learn to steer and navigate this dog any better as a result. So we do the consult, and then we move on to training. And before you know it, she's a heck of a lot more manageable. Now, she's still a nervous dog. That's not going to change. It's not going to go away. It would have been a lot more useful to get our hands on training with this dog when she was a baby. We could have really affected the outcome of her entire life had we started when she was a baby. Now, some dogs are just genetically a mess. They're going to be nervous no matter what you do. You can do everything by the book, and the dog is just going to be what it is. Okay, but at least let's get a handle on them. And let's make that dog the best version of a nervous dog that we can. And let's teach the dog that the things that you thought were mountains are just this. It's just this little coaster on my desk. You can just, boom, and move on with your day. My dog Hooligan can be nervous. New environments, new sounds. I saw it in him as a puppy. coming back from the breeder's place. I saw it a couple of times when I took him out of the car. Now, the average person would look at that and go, well, it's his first day and he's away from his litter and blah, blah, blah. Okay, but an experienced eye is going to look at that and go, yeah, we're going to see that again. Maybe not always, but we'll see it. Sure enough, we got home and just the corridor in the house, he froze. Didn't want to go in the living room. Something about the living room. Is it the arrangement of the furniture? Is it, who knows? So I know how to help him get over that. And then I take him into a bunch of new places and he's fine. And then I take him into a place that he's been before, but hasn't been there in maybe 7 or 8 months. And he just froze. He became a little meek statue of a bulldog. So I help him get past it. I don't avoid it. I don't turn around and leave. I don't ask everyone to leave the room. I give him a chance to explore. And I go back to 2 key points that I talk about in a lot of my videos. Self-motivation and self-discovery. These are essential points in developing any dog's character, and this can spill over into so many aspects of training. So, self-motivation. When the dog is nervous, what is the motivator for the dog? The dog wants to not feel nervous. Just like us, when we're stressed out of our mind, the biggest motivation is to not feel stress. So what some people do is they work towards the issue. What other people do is they take a break and get a cup of coffee. Someone else grabs alcohol. Someone else goes online. Someone else, we do what we do. A dog has a couple of options. I'm going to freeze, I'm going to run away, or I'm going to go and explore. So I want my dog to go and explore what stresses him. That now starts to tickle the self-discovery. Oh, you're scared of this room? Well, let's move around the room. And as he starts to move around the room, he feels a little better. It feels better to move than to just stay still and tremble. Dog that moves is going to loosen up quicker than one that does this, and he's certainly going to feel better than one that's running away. The one that runs away, the self-discovery is very dangerous. The self-discovery there is, I lived to tell the tale because I ran away. My dog stayed. He didn't have a choice. I had his leash, but he stayed. And we walked around. And he starts to discover, no big deal here. So now, the motivation to feel better, that's in the dog. The discovery, nothing bad happened to me. Before you know it, he's standing a little taller. It's very important that the dog be able to feel taller, to feel bigger. I remember saying to one of my clients years ago, and her dog had no trouble with any of this. He was a very poised, maybe a little too poised of a dog. And I told her, I said, he's the kind of dog that if he was walking through a forest, he'd expect the trees to move out of the way for him. I like to see that in a dog, especially a dog that had a little bit of a hiccup with the environment, to now kind of be like, yeah, and so how do we help our dog get there? We don't avoid. We don't medicate the dog towards that. We don't leave the environment. We build the dog towards that. I'll give you some human examples. I'll give you one that's personal to me. I went to Disney with my family years ago, and I have a fear of heights. My daughter was young and she didn't know this about me. So I was going on rides with her, and I went on the Tower of Terror. For those of you that are familiar with Disney, you'll know this ride. And I was not easy on this ride. I was sitting there, but I was trying to kind of play it cool. I don't want to transmit it to our child. And we get off the ride, and just to feel good in the moment, just to kind of calm down and have a pleasant moment, I went and had a double espresso. So I had a double espresso to calm down. Think about that one. And then we went on the ride again after, later in the day. And then before you know it, my wife and daughter are going off doing other things, and I'm going back on the Tower of Terror. It started to become an enjoyable experience for me. What was previously something that was scary is now pleasant. It's something that now I feel a little bit taller. I guess I was in my late 30s. I'm a man in my late 30s at the time, and I can use human logic. Hey, I'm not going to die. I'm strapped in. I'm sitting next to a bunch of people No one's been harmed here. I haven't read anything on Google about people getting killed on the Tower of Terror, so I'll be okay. As long as I don't intentionally jump out, I'll make it. And before you know it, I can kind of predict the ride. I can predict when the ghost kind of pops out of the mirror and all these little things and all these little cues. And I know how it's going to unfold, and I'm starting to look forward to it. Whereas the first time I was like a white knuckle thing. I was just like this. And Disney takes photos, I guess, when you're on rides, because it's another thing they can sell you while you're there. And you see my wife and daughter are just like, yeah, they're having fun. And I'm like this. And then before you know it, I'm the one acting silly. So that's an example of not using avoidance. And I was motivated to not avoid just because we're there as a family. And then by not avoiding, I was very comfortable going on that ride after, and I found it enjoyable. So my world grew as a result instead of shrunk. Another example that involves our daughter, back when she was quite young, I'm diabetic. I would go for blood tests a couple of times a year, and they would draw 5 or 6 vials. Now, our daughter is squeamish, doesn't like the sight of blood. And I said to her, if you come with me, I will give you $50 as long as you watch. You can't look away. You can stomp your feet, you can squint, you can swear, you do what you want to do. But if you want to get paid, you've got to watch. And my whole goal was to help her realize that she could survive this. And so dangling a $50 bill in front of a little kid is pretty motivating. So she came, and the first time she was there, the nurse that was drawing my blood looked at me like, is she going to make it? You know, do I have to get the spatula to scrape the kid off the floor? And it was a little twitchy, but she made it and she did fine. And then we went out. I got a cup of coffee later at Starbucks, and I probably bought her a cake pop or something. And she had her $50, and that was that. And then half a year or 9 months later, I go back, I do the same blood test, and she comes back, and we did this now a number of times. At some point, I'm sitting here in my office, and my daughter walks in and she says, Dad, when is your next blood test? I said, we're done. You can take your hand out of my wallet now. We're done. That meant I did my job. Self-motivation, self-discovery. That's exactly what I used. I treated my dog no differently than I would. Did I just say my dog? I gotta cut that out. I treated our daughter no differently than I would a dog in that kind of context, okay? The dog is scared of this item. I had my dog in sale the other day. It's a store in Canada where you can get a lot of outdoor gear. And they had a surfboard up, or a boogie board, or some, it was giant. And my dog just looked at it and he's like, well, that's there to kill me. I know what that's all about. So I take one piece of kibble, because my dog is the most food motivated dog on the planet. And if I tell him check, he knows to look at the floor right away. So I say check, and I toss it next to the surfboard. And he wants it, but he's not quite sure. And then he goes over and he takes it. And then I do it again, and I throw it, and this time no hesitation, and he goes, and we do it maybe 3 or 4 times. Then I stop, and I'm just chatting with my wife, and my dog now has voluntarily gone and sat next to the surfboard, just like my daughter coming into the office saying, when's your next blood test? Kind of rubbing her greedy little palms together. So my dog is now doing that next to the surfboard. Hey, idiot, pay me, right? That's what I want, because now I took something that previously the dog said, I need to run away from that. The only way I can survive is by running away. And my daughter says, well, I can't look at blood. I can never look at blood. I'll puke. I'll pass out. I don't know what. I'll blow this place up. I'll burn it to the ground. No, you could do it. I know you could do it. Now, if I would have said to my dog or my daughter, it's okay, honey, it's okay, you don't have to, then today it's that. And then fast forward 15 years later, and she's in university and she has to dissect something, and she's developed a pattern of avoidance. So maybe she'd be going to the prof and saying, is there any way I could not do this? Can I do something? And then the prof says, sorry, 0. And then she has to look into an alternate program other than what she wanted to study. And in my dog's case, It's, I can't take you to the stores with me. And eventually you can't come and run on the beach because maybe someone's carrying one of these. And today maybe it's that sailboard, and maybe tomorrow it's a bicycle. So now what we have to avoid, or kids on their skateboards or whatever. So avoidance becomes a pattern. So self-motivation and self-discovery, I've used it on myself. I use it on dogs daily. I'm pointing because he's behind me snoring. I don't know if the mic's picking this up. I've used it on our daughter in a number of things, and it's just something that works. And we grow as a result. Our capacity to tolerate things, our capacity to deal with challenges and stressors improves over time. Whereas if all we're doing is avoiding and medicating, it diminishes over time. So it's like that example of having $1,000 in the bank and you think you're flush for now because maybe your bills are only $7 a month. But a few years from now, that $1,000 doesn't buy you what it does today. Whereas if you invest it, it grows over time. And that should be the goal, is growth. I'll show you some video of a Bernedoodle who was wildly reactive to other dogs. My client was having to avoid other dogs on walks due to the reactivity. The dog was on Prozac. I trained the dog. This is the same dog that I brought into the consult with the collie that I was telling you that the vet then prescribed yet a second medication, even though behavioral training showed itself to work in a matter of minutes for the dog. Now that doesn't mean the problem is solved with that dog. It just shows that if we go down this path and the dog was responsive in just a matter of minutes, that with weeks and months, where would we be? I mean, it would just be fantastic. But the vet felt they needed to add more meds. So this Bernedoodle, not reactive to a multitude of dogs in training, and I'll link to some videos with that dog. And then I'm in the transfer lesson with the Bernedoodle, and the owner is handling the dog and doing great. And it's a kennel. We've got dogs coming in and out, being picked up by their owners, being dropped off by owners. And this pit bull who comes in all the time, he's the happiest dog on the planet. He's so excited. He's just whacked out of his mind all the time. He's not a client of mine. He's not a trained dog, but he's a really nice dog. And he's just a happy guy. Comes in and his energy is like a 15 on 10. And now my client with her reactive Bernedoodle is just standing there. And I'm coaching her through the steps. Okay, if your dog does this, you do that. If your dog does this, you do that. And all I'm really having to tell her is, hey, just pet your dog and tell her good girl. And that pit bull is just going bananas, jumping and barking, and he just wants to play. So big energy coming her way. And now her dog is sitting there cool as a cucumber. That's what we want. It's that stress tolerance. Before that, you could have shown her dog a cardboard cutout of a dog and her dog would have been reactive. Now you're putting her 6-7 feet away from a dog that is just bouncing off the walls with energy, and she's just kind of sitting there nonplussed. And in the videos I'll show you, I mean, her dog is just focused on me, and sometimes we're working and she's focused on me. Other times we're just hanging out and I'm not even asking her for anything, and she's able to just hang out. And in that video in the consult where I brought her out, I didn't give her any direction. And then I gave her to a total stranger, and that stranger's not giving her any direction, and she's not reactive. So that is, again, building a dog's stress tolerance.